What is up, you guys? So recently I consumed 500 grams of black beans per day to see how it would affect my microbiome, my liver markers, insulin sensitivity, would it help with fat loss, detoxification, inflammation, and so on. So it was quite comprehensive. I did a stool test, I did a hormonal test, and I did blood work as well. Now, these are my results, but the lessons that I learned from this is applicable to everyone. And the reason why I do these experiments is to see how my body is reacting to different things, to test and debunk or confirm myths, at least within myself, and ultimately to learn new things. Because science might know some things, but then you do a test and you look at a bunch of additional biomarkers and you learn so much more at the end of the day, which is what I call serendipitous discoveries that nobody knows. Some people might have suspected it, but I'm kind of like confirming it or discovering new things with all of this testing that I am doing. So let's get into it. So the setup was I did two GI map panels. So this looks at your beneficial bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, opportunistic bacteria, things like your short chain fatty acids. It got a bile acid add-on. So it's GI with stool OMX add-on. This is the one that I do consistently. My baseline before this, I consumed about 10 grams of fiber a day. It wasn't really a diverse diet. It was, let's say, some tomatoes, some apples here and there, a little bit of banana here and there. So it wasn't like a massively diverse diet, but my microbiome, the beneficial bacteria, were really happy. Then I planned on doing this for 3 weeks, but I started to feel a little bit off towards the end, so I cut it short. Instead of 21 days, I did 18 days. So I consumed basically 500 to 600 grams of chicken breast plus 500 grams of black beans daily. I was shooting for 750 grams of black beans a day, but I was just like too satiated to consume all of it. So that was a good thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to lose fat, but we'll see. All right, and then I also did the blood work to confirm it. So the hormonal test that I did was in urine, and then I did the blood work for cholesterol, insulin sensitivity, lipids, liver enzymes, etc. And then the stool test, obviously, to look at things in the microbiome. So myth number one, at least this was my results, is that more fiber equals more short-chain fatty acids. The more fiber you provide, the more the bacteria can create the beneficial short-chain fatty acids. So what happened with me, despite increasing my fiber content by 5-fold, my total short-chain fatty acids dropped by 14%. So it dropped, it didn't even increase by 5xing my fiber. My acetate decreased by 29%, my butyrate increased by 68%, and my propionate increased by 27%. That might seem like a win, but butyrate is not the only short-chain fatty acid that matters. 60% of the short-chain fatty acids usually acetate, 20% butyrate, 20% propionate. That's basically the ratios, give and take a little bit. So if your acetate is already optimal and then it drops to low normal, is that a good thing? No, because your body uses acetate as an energy source in the muscle, the liver, the brain, etc. It creates cholesterol. It helps with satiety, insulin sensitivity. So now it drops. That's not necessarily a good thing. Butyrate going up can be considered a good thing. It's the main fuel for the colonocytes, which helps against leaky gut. So we'll get into those markers shortly. And then propionate, which is also helpful for satiety, insulin sensitivity, etc. Now, the whole point here is that you want these optimal ratios, right? So when the acetate is dropping, the butyrate's increasing, you're basically just shifting around with a different short-chain fatty acids. And this is because of a different bacterial species that is growing as a result. So it's not that things are improving when the short-chain fatty acids are just shifting around. It's because the bacterial species are shifting, which is not necessarily a good thing. If the ratios are improving and the short-chain fatty acids total amount is optimizing, that is a good thing. Mine has just shifted. In my opinion, that's not a good thing. All right, so the short-chain fatty acid nuance, this is basically what I just described, is that some of the butyrate producers can actually use acetate to create butyrate. So that could have been why acetate dropped, or it could just be that the acetate-producing bacteria wasn't being properly fed. That's basically my explanation. But interesting thing as well is that my free T3 rose from 4.2 to a 5.2. Now, my free T3 is usually around a 4.7, so the 4.2 was a little bit on the lower side, but I wasn't experiencing any hypothyroid symptoms. But after this bean diet, I was definitely feeling very hot, and this is in the middle of winter as well. So the increase in free T3 was also going into cells. Now, butyrate has been shown to enhance the sensitivity of the thyroid receptor as well. So my free T3 went up and the sensitivity improved, and I definitely felt the heat from the higher levels of free T3. So myth number 2 is that fiber increases bile acid excretion. So your liver creates the bile, it goes into the gallbladder, and when you eat fat, the gallbladder releases it into the gut, so it helps to emulsify the fatty acids so you can actually absorb fat-soluble vitamins. Now, bile is also helpful to kill bacteria in the gut, as well as fungus. So if you don't have enough bile, you will end up with things like slow transit time, constipation, bacterial overgrowth, deficiencies in the fat-soluble vitamins. But when you have an excess amount of it, that can lead to intestinal inflammation, it can lead to diarrhea. Now, the thing is, after it's been released into the gut, the body can then reabsorb it, so it doesn't have to create new bile acids over and over. So the whole premise here is that the more fiber you eat, the more it binds to the bile acids and the toxins being excreted into the bile, including estrogen, xenoestrogens, plastics, heavy metals, all of this kind of stuff. It binds it so you don't reabsorb it. So what you would generally expect is that the more fiber you eat, the more bile would end up in your stool. My total bile acids dropped by almost 60%. My primary bile acids also dropped by about 60%, which was flagged low, and my secondary bile acids was at 99.5%, which is basically ideal. Like the ratio between the primary and secondary was ideal. There's bacteria in the gut that converts your primary into secondary bile. So that conversion for me was perfect, but the total bile acids dropped. So it could be because I reduced my fat intake, but I was already eating very low fat, and just switching to chicken breast, I maybe at most reduced my fat intake by 10-20 grams additionally. So it's not like I massively changed the amount of fat that I was consuming, but this is a massive drop in bile acids. Myth number 3 is that more fiber equals more diversity in keystone species. Now, some of my beneficial bacteria did definitely increase. Bifidobacterium went up 15-fold, Faecalibacterium went up 80-fold, Lactobacilli went up 11-fold, despite actually consuming less dairy during this period. We have Bacteroides, which nearly tripled, Firmicutes, which increased by 16-fold. So the ratio might look a little bit skewed between those two, but both increased. So the longer I would have done it, the ratio would have stayed ideal. But my Akkermansia decreased by 15-fold, and that's a bacteria that a lot of people want to optimize, that helps to reduce intestinal inflammation, it improves insulin sensitivity, help to manage weight, all of those kind of stuff. Mine reduced by 15-fold. So in general, this would look like a win because a lot of the beneficial bacteria increased. But on the flip side is if someone has SIBO, this can worsen SIBO because SIBO is basically an overgrowth of bacteria, or even like gut dysbiosis, where you have just an overgrowth of bacteria in general, can lead to more overgrowth, worsen that overgrowth. So this is the beneficial bacteria. Now, myth number 4 is that it selectively feeds the good bacteria. What happened is that a lot of my opportunistic bacteria also increased. Now, opportunistic bacteria isn't always a bad thing. If it's present in low amounts, it's fine. If it's present in high amounts, especially if it's the ones that create histamine or endotoxin, that is going to skyrocket your inflammation. So my Fusobacterium increased by 12,000-fold. This is a massive histamine producer, and I definitely noticed that my food sensitivity started to get worse. My scalp became very itchy. I became sensitive to light. So a lot of the symptoms that relates to high histamine got worse for me. And when I did the stool test, yes, that makes sense. My bacillus increased by 19-fold, which was undetectable. Enterococcus, which was undetectable, also increased over the reference range. Pseudomonas increased from below the detectable limit to over the reference range, and my Streptococcus 3-fold. Now, Streptococcus contains the enzyme protease, so it cleaves your IgA. IgA is part of the immune system and helps to bind and clear toxins like endotoxin. So when it's high, it protects the body against things that can cause inflammation. But when it drops, now the inflammation or that same amount of endotoxin can create so much more inflammation. So the Streptococcus contains this protease enzyme that cleaves it, and it's been thought as a survival mechanism, right? And this significantly worsens your inflammation. The point here is that fiber increased both my beneficial and harmful bacteria. And at the end of the day, the increase in beneficial bacteria was not just good. It wasn't enough to offset the inflammation induced by these opportunistic pathological bacteria. So in terms of the immune surveillance, the IgA dropped by almost 90%. So it dropped from over the reference range to the critically low range, like massive drop. And again, the mechanism is basically degradation of the IgA. Then we have the metabolic markers. These ones were to me the most interesting. So cholesterol should have dropped, but it dropped from a 5.6 to a 5.5. That's a very minor drop, and it could just be because I reduced my fat intake as well. This is not specifically due to the fiber that I consumed. LDL dropped, HDL dropped, but this could just be that cholesterol in general dropped, but the HDL dropping more than the LDL is not a good sign. My hsCRP, which is a marker of acute inflammation, actually went up from a 0.8 to a 1.7, which is in line with the growth of the opportunistic bacteria. And then my fasting insulin also got worse from a 4.7 to a 6. It increased by almost 3%. So it's not insulin resistance, diabetic, the world is falling apart bad, but it's trending in the wrong direction. And someone like Tim Ferriss is a big proponent. He created a slow carb diet, which is where you eat beans and lentils because the glucose is released so slowly into your system. You don't need a lot of insulin. Your body can process it very quickly. It's great for satiety. And people just lose weight without having to calculate their calories. Now, my fasting insulin getting worse, the hsCRP getting worse, would indicate that the growth in the pathological bacteria is creating the inflammation, which is then worsening the fasting insulin and insulin sensitivity, which is not a good thing. Again, there were some wins, but most of it was actually not a win. So in terms of weight loss, is that, again, coming back to the slow carb diet, people would say, eat beans, it's great for satiety, it's not going to spike your insulin. People with lower fasting insulin lose more weight. On the contrary, mine increased and I didn't lose any weight. And this isn't the first time it happened. I've done the bean diet or variation of it many times in the past before, because sometimes you want some beans. Beans doesn't taste bad. Eat some beans, just never lose weight. And if I do it long enough, actually start to gain weight on it. And this could be related to the inflammation that's getting worse, which leads to the weight gain. And it's not when I cut the beans, I just suddenly lose all the water weight. It wasn't water weight. It's different. I can't lose weight, and I'm actually gaining weight when consuming beans. But again, I was very satiated. The goal was to eat 750 grams of beans. I was only consuming 500. So the reason why I think this happened is because histamine increased, endotoxin increased, created inflammation, and it's very hard to lose weight when you're inflamed all the time. And I definitely looked a lot more poofy, inflammation in the face, when I did this diet. So I would say, like, from all of the frameworks out there, the Repeat one makes the most sense. He's been preaching about this for a long time. I wouldn't say, like, I agree with a lot of things that he says, but I wouldn't agree with everything that he says. If you eat beans here and there, it's fine. If you do the bean diet specifically and you're predisposed to having overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria, then probably don't do it. Now, people would argue you need more diversity. You shouldn't have eaten just black beans, right? But there's no research to suggest that having more diversity would not have allowed the overgrowth of the opportunistic bacteria. Fiber is fiber, is going to grow bacteria that is capable of growing opportunistic bacteria as well. So I would say, if you're predisposed to gut issues, any type of fiber in massive amounts could significantly worsen it. Now, some gut gurus would say that they have fixed their gut issues, but they still manage it with elimination diet, and they never do repeat testing. So if you're managing your symptoms with elimination diet or a specific diet, you haven't fixed it. You haven't built that resilience. So you can't say you fixed it. You're just managing it. So the whole point is that you want to build the resilience that when you challenge yourself with something like beans or something that you were sensitive to in the past, it's not going to cause intestinal inflammation and it's not going to allow the overgrowth of the opportunistic bacteria. Now, a big lesson here is that it is individual. This is me. This is an N of one. People would say, yeah, it's just you. It doesn't matter. It's like that is the only thing that matters, is how my body is responding to food. That is what matters. And the same thing for you. Studies don't matter for you. How you respond to foods matter for you. That's the only thing that matters, which is why you do, let's say, elimination diet. You test specific foods. You do a stool test. You adjust your protocol. You do the stool test again, over and over, until you no longer manage the symptoms, but you've actually built that resilience where your gut is at a point where you can basically eat whatever you want. Not that is encouraged, of course. So that is it. And as I mentioned, this was just an experiment to see if the claims online match my results, or my results match the claims. I've already figured out what I do based on. I already know what to eat, fat composition, protein composition, meal combinations, how much carbs, how much fat. I know what I flourish based on, but I still do these experiments to see how they would affect my microbiome to learn new things. That will then be able to help me help you guys better. So I've already constructed the whole ultimate guide on how to optimize your digestion, how to find exactly what works for you while you focus on rebuilding your resilience. Link for that is in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll check you in the next one.